In the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire stood at the height of its power. Its legions stretched from the deserts of the Middle East to the forests of Germania, and from the sun-baked shores of North Africa to the misty frontiers of Britannia. Wherever they marched, the Romans imposed not only their military might, but also their laws, their taxes, and their culture. But in the eastern lands of Britain, beyond the walls of Roman stone, there lived a proud and fierce people, the Iceni tribe. They were warriors, farmers, craftsmen, and guardians of ancient traditions, independent and unwilling to bow their heads to foreign masters. At the heart of the Iceni stood a woman whose name would echo across the centuries, Boudica. She was no ordinary queen. Ancient historians describe her as tall and commanding, with piercing eyes and hair the color of fire, cascading down to her waist. Her presence alone could silence a crowd. She was not merely a figurehead, not simply a consort to a king, she was a force of nature. Her husband, King Prasutagus, ruled the Iceni under a fragile alliance with Rome. He understood the power of the empire and sought to preserve his people by compromise. When he died, Prasutagus left a will, dividing his lands between his 2 daughters and the Emperor of Rome. It was a desperate attempt to secure peace, to ensure that the Iceni would remain free of direct Roman control. But Rome had little respect for such agreements when conquest was within reach. Instead of honoring Prasutagus's will, Roman officials descended upon the Iceni with greed and cruelty. They seized the lands of the tribe, enslaved its people, and stripped them of their wealth. And then, in an act that would ignite one of the most ferocious rebellions in history, they publicly humiliated Boudica herself, whipping her before her people, and subjected her young daughters to unspeakable violence at the hands of Roman soldiers. This was more than a crime. It was a violation that struck at the heart of Iceni honor, a scar upon the dignity of their queen, and a wound that no warrior would leave unanswered. Boudica rose from the lash not broken, but transformed. She became a living embodiment of vengeance. She was no longer only a mother, a widow, or a queen. She was the voice of an entire people calling for justice. She stood before her tribe and declared that Rome's arrogance would be their undoing. Her words carried the weight of a prophetess and the fire of a warrior. And one by one, the tribes of Britain rallied to her cause. The Trinovans, long oppressed by Roman colonists. The Cornovii, the Dumnonii, and many others who had suffered the heavy hand of Roman taxation and humiliation. For generations, these tribes had fought one another, divided by rivalries and blood feuds. But under Boudica, they united, not as Iceni, not as Trinovans, but as Britons. Their weapons were simple compared to Rome's disciplined legions: iron swords, spears, and wooden shields painted with tribal symbols. Yet they were driven by something far more powerful than steel: rage, honor, and the dream of freedom. The first target of their fury was Camulodunum, modern Colchester, a Roman colony that had become a symbol of oppression. It was more than a city, it was a statement of Roman dominance. Its stone temples were dedicated to the emperor, its streets filled with colonists who looked down on the native Britons as barbarians. Boudica and her army descended upon the city with fire and steel. The Roman defenders were few and unprepared. The temple to Claudius, once a monument to imperial might, became a tomb for those who sought refuge inside. The colony was burned to the ground. From Camulodunum, the storm of rebellion rolled onward. Londinium, the rising hub of Roman Britain, fell next. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, abandoned the city to save his army, leaving thousands of civilians to face Boudica's wrath. The city burned, its people cut down in the streets. Then came Verulamium, modern St. Albans. It too was reduced to ash. Everywhere Boudica marched, Rome's veneer of invincibility was shattered. Ancient sources claim that over 70,000 Romans and their allies perished in the uprising. The roads of Britannia were choked with smoke, the skies red with fire, and the earth soaked with blood. But this was only the beginning. For as mighty as her victories were, the legions of Rome had not yet unleashed their full fury. And soon, Boudica would find herself facing the greatest test of all, a direct confrontation with the most disciplined war machine the ancient world had ever known. The warrior queen who had risen from humiliation to vengeance now stood at the peak of her power, her people united, her enemies trembling. Yet even she could not know that her destiny would shape not only the future of Britannia, but the very memory of resistance against empire for all time. But Boudica was not finished. With fire in her eyes and vengeance in her heart, she gathered her people once more. The Iceni, joined by other Celtic tribes, became an unstoppable wave. Their numbers swelled into the tens of thousands. Farmers, hunters, and warriors, men and women alike, answered Boudica's call to arms. They had tasted victory, and they believed the gods walked beside their queen. Her army surged across Britain like a storm. They destroyed Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, the proud Roman colony. Not a stone was left untouched. Survivors spoke of temples burning, Roman citizens begging for mercy, and the fury of the Celts unleashed upon the oppressors. Soon after, Londinium, today's London, met the same fate. Rome's jewel in Britain was reduced to ashes. Even Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans, fell before Boudica's wrath. For a moment, it seemed as if Rome itself would be driven from the island. The legend of Boudica spread like wildfire, carried by whispers of rebellion. Yet, the Roman Empire was never so easily defeated. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, a man hardened by war, gathered every soldier he could find. Though vastly outnumbered, the Romans had discipline, armor, and tactics forged by centuries of conquest. The final confrontation came in a place whose name has been lost to history, somewhere along the Roman roads of Britain. Boudica's forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands, the Romans, only around 10,000. Yet, the narrow battlefield favored the disciplined legions. Shield locked with shield, the Romans formed their deadly wedge formations, cutting through the Celtic masses with brutal efficiency. The Celts fought with heart, but passion could not overcome Roman steel. When the dust settled, Boudica's army was shattered. The Iceni queen herself disappeared from history. Some say she drank poison to avoid capture, others that she fell in battle, sword in hand. No one knows for certain. What we do know is this: Boudica became more than a queen. She became a legend. For centuries, she has stood as a symbol of resistance, defiance, and the indomitable spirit of a people who refused to bow quietly. Her story has been told by Romans, revived by poets, and carved into the very identity of Britain. Even today, a statue of Boudica stands near the Houses of Parliament in London, reminding the world that once, a woman dared to defy the greatest empire on earth. Boudica was not just a warrior queen. She was the embodiment of freedom's rage. And her name will never be forgotten. If you felt the power of Boudica's story, imagine the countless other warriors whose courage shaped history. Subscribe now, leave a like, and share this video with those who love tales of bravery, rebellion, and unstoppable spirit. The journey of history's greatest warriors has only just begun.